Hi everyone, welcome to this video. So today I'm going to be talking about class-based views in Django, and we're going to look at how we can modify an app that has function-based views and turn it into one that has its views described in a way that is class-based. So we're going to also look at the importance of using class-based views and how they can help us turn our views or our view functions into objects that can be able to be customizable in very many ways. So to start, I'm going to begin by first of all creating a Django project. I have Django installed on my machine, but you can create a virtual environment and install it with pip. So I'm going to get started by just opening up my terminal right here. And in this terminal, I'll start by calling our Django admin. So I have a lot of applications that run on Django. So I usually have a system installation of Django. Now I'm going to start by creating a project with Django admin start project, and I'll call this, let's say, tasks. So this will be a very simple tasks app. So I'll say task project, and then I'll specify that we need it in our current folder. And once we've been able to do that, we now see that our manage.py is right here within our folder. So let me enlarge this a little bit so that you can see more. So once we have our manage.py folder, I'm going to use it to create a simple app. So I'll begin by saying Python manage.py, it's actually manage.py, and then start app, and I'm going to call this our tasks app, and that will go ahead and create our tasks app just like we see right here. Now the first thing is going to be for us to be able to register that app within our main project settings. So to do that, I'm going to first of all close my terminal, and then I'm going to look for my settings file, which is in our project right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is to look for our installed apps variable. Now the good thing about VS Code is that it has this outline panel right here where you can be able to see what variables, what functions are in your code. So I'm going to look for the installed apps right here, and this is where it is. So it will navigate me to where the installed apps list is. So the beauty about this is when you know where your variable is, then it will be easier for you to basically go ahead and just navigate through long lines of code. So right here in my installed apps, I'm going to go ahead and add our tasks app just like this. So I'll say tasks. And once I've been able to do that, now all the work that we're going to do from now on is going to be within our tasks app. So I'm going to close our project, head over to our tasks app. Now we're going to begin by first of all describing a model for our tasks. Now I'm going to go within our models. So one thing I usually do is to create a docstring, and in this docstring I go ahead and define the model that I want. So this is going to be a class. It's going to define a task. Now each task is first of all going to have a date which we created it. So shall have that being our date created, and that will be a datetime object. So we're going to say that's going to be a datetime object. We shall now also have the ID of that specific task, so that will be an integer. We shall have the title, so that's going to be like, let's actually just say that that's going to be the name, and then that name is going to be a string. We shall also have a description. Now I'm going to set the description right here, description, and that will also be long text. Now that we've understood the kind of class that you're going to create, let's go ahead and create a database model out of this. So what I'm going to do is to simply go ahead and fix the indentation right here. And then in here, I'm going to begin by creating a class, and I'm going to call our task class. Now this task class is going to be inheriting from models.model. And once we've been able to do that, then we're going to define some of the fields that we have. Let us begin with the name of our task. So that's going to be of type models.character field, and in here we have to specify the max length. So we're going to say that our max length is going to be equal to 50 characters. The next thing we're going to define is going to be the description. So in this case we're going to say description, and this description is going to be models.text field. And once we've been able to do that, we're also going to go ahead and define our date created. Now, if you're to notice, I'm not actually talking so much about the ID. And the reason for this is because we have Django that helps us to automatically set the ID with an integer. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and define our this is actually going to be our date created. So we're going to come and say that our date created, and this is going to be models dot date time field. And once I've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for me to specify that we need this to be saved each time we create the object. So I'll say auto now add, and I'll set this to true. So once I've been able to do this, the next thing is going to be for me to define a string representation of each of the tasks has, so that you can be able to see them in a much more reasonable way in our admin. So I'm going to come and say def, and then this will be our under str. So instead of returning super.str, in this case, we're going to return our name for a particular task. Now, once I've been able to do this, the next thing I'm also going to do is to be able to register it within my admin.py. So this is basically going to be by just saying admin.sites.register. So this is going to be admin.site.register, and here we shall register our model. So I'm going to import it by saying from. In this case, we shall say from dot models. We are going to import our database model, which is our task model. So when I come in here, I'm going to just provide our model class, which is our task class, and that is going to be it. So the next thing we're going to do is to actually create a migration file that's going to help us to create the changes on our database. Django also has migrations that come inbuilt, so we're also going to need to run those. So I'm going to pull up my terminal, and the first thing I'm going to do is to say python money.py make migrations, and this is going to go ahead and look for the newest model. So in this case, it's going to create our model, which is our task model. Now the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and migrate all these migrations into our database. So to do that, I'm going to say python money.py migrate, and that will go ahead and basically migrate all the Django inbuilt models or Django inbuilt migrations into our database. By default, we're going to be using an SQLite 3 database, but for serious applications, you may need to use something like Postgres or MySQL. So once we've been able to do that, now I'm going to create a super user that will allow us to access Django's admin interface. So for me to do that, I'm going to say python money.py, and I'll say create super user. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'll set the default to that, and then I'll give in my email address, and I'll provide a password. And once I've been able to do that, our super user will be created successfully. Now I'm going to go ahead and run our app, so I'll do that with python manage.py and then run server. So that will go ahead and actually run our server. So shall see that our server is now running at localhost 8000. So I'll click on that, and this will go ahead and open up our tasks app right here. I think I have another app running, so let me go ahead and stop that. So I'm going to navigate to where I have that running, and then I'll stop that. So I'll go ahead and click on my new app, and now we shall see that our Django installation is running successfully. So I have other apps that run on that port. That's why you see that I had another app running, but this is basically what we have. So once we've been able to do this, then let's try to access our admin. So I'm going to go to /admin, and on /admin, I'll log in with the user we've created and the password that we gave to that user. So once we've been able to do that, we now have a simple tasks model displayed right here. So I'll go to tasks, and then I'll add a new task. So I'm just going to give it a name. So I'll say go to chat. And then in here, I'll say go and study the word. And I'll go ahead and hit save. And then I'll also add another task. So I'm going to call this so let's say we're going to learn Python. And then we can also add a description here. So this description is going to be learn the basics of let's say async IO. This is actually one of the videos I want to create. So I'll hit save. Now we have 2 tasks in our database. Now you may notice that we are actually having the titles, and these are coming from our representation that we did in our model file, which is basically this standard str function. So when you go back to our browser right here, we're now going to see that we have our tasks, and their titles are what are going to be displayed like this. So I'll go ahead, hit add task, and in here, I'm just going to go ahead and say have lunch, and then I'll say go and get some. So shall just basically go and get some food. I'll hit save. Now that we have some tasks, let's go ahead and actually build an application that's going to make use of our task. So we're going to just be building a very simple CRUD app, and we're going to build it first of all using function-based views, and then we shall update it so that we use class-based views. So the first thing we're going to do is to first of all create the different view functions that we're going to need to render the different templates that we shall use to build this application. I'm going to go back to our code, and the first thing we're going to do is to head over to our settings.py file. So I'm going to still use my outline right here, and we're going to look for our templates variable. So this templates variable in here is going to contain the DAS key. So what we want to do is to set the templates folder to be at the root of our project, so that all the templates that we shall use are going to be found there. So I'm going to come in here and say that we're going to have best dar slash, and then this is going to be templates. So I'm going to fix this. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and create our templates folder. So I'll close everything we have right here and then create a folder. I'll call this our templates folder. So I'll say templates. And in here, now let's go ahead and create the different views. So I'm going to look for my view folder. So in VS Code, you can say Ctrl E. It will open up this search files by name field. So in here, I'm going to look for views, and this is going to exist within our app, which is our tasks app. However, you can have many, when you have many apps, you can have views located in those different apps, and this will basically bring them. So when I say views.py, in here, I'm going to go ahead and create all the views that we're going to need for our simple tasks app. So I'm going to begin by defining all of them. So I'll say def. We're going to begin with our home page. So we're going to say home. This is going to take in a request object, and then we shall return a response, but I have to pass this for now. Now I'm going to copy this. So in here, we're going to have the one for home. We shall have the one for basically adding a task. And then we shall have one for, so this is basically going to be for viewing the details. So we shall call this our task detail, or let's say we shall call it our view task. And then this will take in an ID of that particular task. So we shall call this the task ID. And we're going to pass this. So we're going to have one for basically updating a task. So shall just come here and say update task, or let's actually call it update task. In here, we shall have the task ID. So I'm just going to set the task ID right here. And the next thing we're going to do is to also have one for deleting a task. So I basically call this delete task, and this will also take in a request object, and also the task ID. So I'll say task and then ID. So I'll go ahead and pass this for now. So once we have all these view functions, now let's go ahead and define the logic that's going to be behind all these view functions. Now, just like you know, these view functions basically take in a request and then return a response. So let's go ahead and define the response that will be returned by this function. So what we expect is when you go to the home page, we call this function and then we return a template that will render all our tasks. So for us to be able to do this, we are going to make use of our render function that is already imported for us here from Django.shortcuts. I'm going to come and say return, and we shall say render. In here, we need to provide the request object, and then we have to define the name of the template that we're going to render. So what I'm going to do is to come and say index.html, And then in case we have any context, actually we shall have some context, because then we want this page to render all our tasks. So what I'm going to do is to come right here and then say tasks, and then this is going to be basically a query for all the tasks that exist within our database. So that means you have to import our model. So I'll say from .models, we are going to import our task model. So once we've been able to do that, I'll say task.objects, and then in this case, we shall say .all. So this will basically give us all the tasks that exist within our database. Now, once we've been able to do that, I'm going to come right here, and then within our context, we're going to create a dictionary called context, and this will have key value pairs. Now, these keys are what are going to help us to access them from our template side. So I'll just come and say tasks, and these will be the actual tasks as they are queried from the database. Now, we shall have to also pass that as an argument to our render function. So I'll just come and say context. So once we've been able to do this, let me actually provide our context. So I'll say that we shall have our context, and that will be it. So let's go ahead and create this index.html template. Now what I'm going to do is to head over to my templates right here, and I'll create a new file that I'm going to call index.html. So once we've been able to create this, then the next thing is going to be for us to define the HTML that's going to exist within that page. Now we're going to also have a layout, so I'm going to create a simple base.html file that's going to have the entire structure of our web page, and it's going to define the layout that's going to be found across all pages. So I'm going to do is to say exclamation mark and then tab, so that will basically create for us the HTML structure of the page, and then I'll call this our tasks app. And in this case, once I'm done with that, so just create a header in here. Very basic, we're trying to do a very basic app, so I'll just create a header, and then we shall have links to our home, and then we shall have links to, let's say, creating tasks. So I'll just say create tasks. So once I've been able to do this, then the next thing is going to be for us to define the main part of our application where everything will be. So I'll define main, and in here I'm going to provide a block that's going to be for all the content. So I'll just say block, and then I'll call this block content. You can call it block body or anything that you want, as long as you remember it in the files that are going to inherit this template. So once you've been able to do that, then I'm going to save and then head over to our index.html. So this will extend from our base.html. And once you've been able to do that, then we need to say block, and then this will be block content. So that basically means that we are going to define all the content for that specific page within the layout, and it's going to exist within these two block tags. Now I'm going to create a simple h1 that's going to basically be all tasks, and then we are going to go ahead and render all of them. So I'm going to create a URL, and within this URL I'm going to create list items. So I'll say for, I'll use a for loop and then loop over all the tasks, because right now we can access them from our template. So I'll say from task in, for task in tasks, then we're going to have a list item, and this list item is going to have a link to the detail of that specific task. So in here we're going to provide our task, so we shall access our task by using this tag, by using this template syntax. So shall say task dot name, and when you save, when you go back to our web page, so if you want to access our web page at localhost 8000, we shall see that it's not rendered because we haven't yet attached the URL. So we need to do that. So I'm going to go within our tasks app, and then I'll create a new file which I'm going to call urls.py. So urls.py is going to have URL patterns that we shall later register onto our main project. So for us to begin, we're going to first import our path that's going to allow us to attach all these view functions to a specific URL. So I'm going to import that from Django.urls. So I'll say from Django.urls, we shall import our path, sorry for that. And then I'm going to use our URL patterns. So I have this general extension that helps me to generate some code snippets that I can use. Check it out. So I'll begin by creating a path, and this path is going to first of all require a route or a URL, and then after that we shall attach a view function. So we're going to first of all import our view. So I'll say from dot shall import our views. So this is basically the relative import, and then we are going to say views dot and then the view function that we basically defined in here. So I'm going to say this is going to be our views.home. So I'll say views.home, and then I'll give this the name. So the name is going to help us when we are using these URLs within our template. So I'll call this our home page. And once we've been able to do that, now I'm going to copy this and paste it for the different view functions. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 view functions in our code. So I'm going to do it for the 5 view functions. I'll copy this and then update them accordingly. So I'll say path, 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 path. Now instead of having views.home, now we're going to work on the one for add task. I'm going to come here and I'll call this add, and then I'll call it views.add. And then here we shall just basically say that our URL is going to have the name of add task. And then we shall go ahead and do the same thing. So this is the one for accessing the task by ID. So I'm just going to call this task slash, and then here we shall have an int ID. So in here, we are going to go ahead and define our view as the one for view task. And then we shall also change the URL name to basically view task. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing will also be to basically use the same URL patterns, because now we shall be requiring the task ID for all this. But I'm going to add update here because this is the one for updating, just to make it unique. So this is going to be the one for update task, and then we shall have the one for deleting task. So it will have the same URL but with the word delete. So in here we shall have views dot, so this will actually be delete task. So I'm going to update this to our update task. So I'll call this update task, and then I'll go ahead and set this up to be the one for deleting our task. So once this is done, then the next thing we're going to do is to attach these URLs onto our project. Now we're going to do that within our URLs that are going to be found within our project. Now distinguish between these URL patterns for an app and the ones for a project. Basically, what these are the ones that are specific to the app, which is our tasks app. And then these URLs are the entire project URL. So where we glue all the URLs defined in all the apps onto our project. So I'm going to begin by importing the include function. What is going to help us is to basically include the URLs from an external app. So I'm going to come in here and say path and then include. So here we are going to go ahead and define this as path, and then we shall have our URL. So these are going to lie from the root URL. And then I'll say include, and I'll provide tasks dot URLs. So once I've been able to do this, I'm going to save, and then let's try to run our server. Hoping that our server is running again. You're now seeing that views task.views has no attribute add. I think the view function is add tasks. So let me change that. So when we go to our URLs of tasks, we're going to modify this and call it add task. So hoping that everything is running fine. We're now going to see that this is going to be running our server. So when we have this, then the next thing is going to be for us to confirm if our template is being rendered. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh. In this case, we shall see that our tasks, as we created them on the admin, are actually going to be shown on the screen. So one thing we need to implement is the route that takes us to the detail page. Now let's go back to our view functions. So when we say Ctrl E, then you look for views, that will bring our view functions in our views.py within our tasks app. So now let's take care of the detail page. So we have this view task view function that's going to be the one to return for us the detail of each of our tasks. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and define this. So I'll say that we're going to first of all query for the task by its ID. Now just say task, and this is going to be equal to task dot objects. So there are very many ways to do this. We can actually use a shortcut, which is get object or 404, which will basically get the object and throw 404 if it doesn't exist. But let's just use the way of using objects, and then we say dot get, and then here we shall basically provide our ID. So we shall say we're getting the one that has an ID which is equal to the task ID. So once we've been able to do this, then the next thing we're going to do is to create a context, and this context will be a dictionary, but it will have our task, and then in here we shall have the task being that task we've created from the database. So we're going to return a template, so I'll say return render. In here we're going to have our request, and then we shall have a template name. Now this will be our detail.html. So I'll go ahead and provide our context, which is basically our context like the one we have there. So let's go ahead and create this template. So I'll come in our templates folder right here and create a new file, which I'm going to call detail.html. So once I've been able to create this detail.html file, I'm going to go ahead and also extend the layout of our base.html file. So I'll come and say base.html, and then I'm going to go ahead and say block, and this will be our block content. So this is where I'm going to actually go ahead and define the detail of the entire page. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and basically create an H1. So this will have our task name. So shall say task dot name, and then we shall have the description. So I'll just basically do the same thing by saying task dot description. And then after doing that, I'll save. So let's go ahead and try to create a route that will lead us to this page. So the way we're going to do that is by going to our index.html, and where we have the link that leads us to our task detail is basically when you click on this link, we're supposed to navigate to the detail page that will show us the detail of that specific task. So for us to link this so that we actually have the detail page, we'll have to use the name that we defined in here, which is actually our view task. So I'm going to use the URL tag that's provided by Django. So I'll go to our index.html, and then I'll use the URL tag. And basically in here, I'll have to provide the name. So when you go back here, it's actually the name of view task. I'm going to come and copy it, paste it in here, and then you shall have to provide the ID as an argument. So the ID, did we call it the ID or the task ID? Let me actually go ahead and see that. We actually called it the ID, but in our view function, we call it the task ID. So we need to change that. So I'll have to call this the task ID, otherwise Django will give me an error. So I'm going to come and say task ID. And once I've been able to do that, then I'll come and say that we shall have our task ID being equal to task dot ID. So once you've been able to do this and we save, hoping that our server is running, it is. When you go back here and refresh, we shall now see that our links are actually having URLs. So if we click, we can now see that this takes us to the detail page, which is good. When you go back, and basically these are not actually working, so let's also go ahead and provide them. So in here, when you go to our base.html, I'll have to provide the link to our home page. So I'll say URL. Now all this is being provided by the Django extension, and it basically helps me to write these tags and statements very easy. So I'm just going to come here and say this is going to be to our home page. So when I save and refresh, we shall now go to our home page by clicking home. It will take us back to our home page. So if we click any of the tasks, we can be able to view the detail just like we have here. Everything is working nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to delete and update these tasks. Actually, one we haven't worked on is for creating our tasks. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and define a form that's going to be the one we're going to use to create these tasks. So I'm going to head over to our tasks app. And then within our tasks app, I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be our forms.py. Now in our forms.py file right here, what we're going to do is to define a form that's going to use all the fields from our model. So it's going to be a model form. So I'm going to start by importing our forms. So I'll say from Django, we are going to import our forms. And once we've been able to do that, then we're also going to go ahead and import our model. So I'll say from dot model, we are going to import our task model. So that's going to be our task model. Actually from our models, shall import our task. Now we're going to define a model form that's going to be from, basically this is going to provide fields that are from the task model. So if we come here and say task create form, and this will be from forms dot model form. So a model form is one that allows us to basically create fields that are from our database. So once I'll do this, let me actually create the spelling here, correct it and make it task create form. And then in here, I'll have to define a meta class. So this is going to be a meta class in which we are going to have fields. So shall have our fields, and these fields are what we're going to have from our model. So let us describe this. So we shall have our name, and we shall have our description, and then we are going to have, actually these are the only things that we have. Then we shall also have to define the model. So in this case, our model is going to be our task model. So once we've been able to do this, then the next thing for us to do is going to be to render this in a template and then use that template to create tasks. So for us to do that, we shall have to go to our view function. So I'm going to search for our view function. Still, I'm using Ctrl-A. And when you go to our view, our create task, which is add task, which we have here, the first thing we're going to do is to import our form. So I'll go at the top of our code and say from dot forms import. In this case, what we're going to do is to import our task create form. So once we have our task create form, then we're going to go ahead and create a form object out of that form class. So I'm going to say form, and in this case, our form is going to be our task create form. And when we have this, then the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and basically check if our request method is post. So each time we submit a form, we're going to need to have this method being post. For that, we send the data to the server. And when the data is valid from our form, because the form is going to validate the data, then we shall save the task that's being created. So to do that, we shall first of all check for our method. Shall say request dot method is equal to post. So that's when we are sending data to the server. So shall say if request.method is equal to post, then the next thing we're going to do is to basically get the form, but with the data from our request. So for us to do that, we're going to say that our form is going to be updated to 1. That's going to be the instance of our form class, which is the task created form, but the data in that form is actually going to be the one from our post request. So we shall access that via request.post. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing we're going to do is to check if this form object is valid. So each time we have a form containing data, we can call form.isValid, and this will return true or false depending on whether the form is valid. So we shall say if form.isValid. In this case, we are going to come and say form.isValid dot save. And then you shall have to redirect back to our home page. So we're going to say return redirect. So we shall have to import this. Now this is also a shortcut from Django, so I'll come at the top and say from Django import from Django.shortcuts import redirect, and then in here we're going to have to redirect to, and in this case I'm going to import reverse that will help us to redirect to URLs based on our names that we provided within our URLs. So shall this something like homepage, add task, view task, or update task. So when you go back to our views, I'll come and say I'll actually first import our reverse. So just come and say reverse. This is actually from Django.urls. So that's going to be from Django URLs. We are going to import reverse. And then after doing that, we're going to come right here. And then we shall redirect reverse. And then we shall provide our home page. So this will basically redirect to the URL of our home page. So in case this is not valid, what we expect to do is to just render the template again. So I'll just come here and say return render, and then we shall redirect. Actually, we shall render the page again. So this will take in our request object and then our template. So our template is going to be add.html, and then we shall also have our context. Now the context is going to contain the following. So it's going to contain the form that we're going to use to submit data to our server. So for us to do that, I'm going to come and say context, and this context is going to be a dictionary with a key of our form and a value of our form. So this is actually going to be form, and then we shall have form. So once we've been able to do that, now let's go ahead and create this template and render it. So I'll come in our templates folder, create a new file. I'll call this add.html, and then we shall extend our layout. So it's going to be extends, it's going to be base.html. Then we're going to basically put this in our layout. So this will fall within our block content and end block content. So once that's it done, now let's go ahead and define our form. So I'll create an h1, and this h1 is going to be the one for create task. And in here, we're going to basically come and we shall have a form. Now this form is going to be having a method of post. So shall come and say that our form is going to have a method. This method is going to be the one for post. So contain our method, which is going to be equal to post. Sorry for this. So we shall have post. And once we have this, then we shall need a CSRF token to prevent us from submitting data in its raw form, because then people will be knowing whatever we are submitting. So in this case, we shall say CRF token. And once we've been able to do that, then we shall render our form. So just come and say form.as paragraph, because we're creating a very simple HTML template, no styling, nothing. So, and then the next thing we shall need is going to be a submit button. So I'll say input value, and this is going to be the one for add task. So when I save, I'm going to go ahead and render this template. So when I come right here, I'll go to our home page, and then when try to access this page, we now can't create our task because we don't have this link having its URL. So let's fix that. So I'm going to go back to our index.html. It's actually within our base.html. So search for my base.html, and I'm going to check our URL, and sorry for this. So this is going to be the one for add. And in here, we're going to have add task. So when we refresh, we shall now be able to create our tasks, and we have our form created right here. So we're keeping it simple. Now the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and basically access each of these tasks and be able to create a task. Now let's first of all handle the functionality of our form. When you try to create some tasks here, we can basically create some stuff here and submit, but we actually see that it's being saved, which is basically showing that our view function is working, because what we did was to check if the request method is post, and if it's post, then we're going to go ahead and save our data if our form is valid, which is good. Now let's go ahead and work on the others. So the others are going to work similarly to what we have here. We have the one for updating a task, so let's go ahead and work on that. The first thing I'm going to do is to first of all render the template for updating our task. So I'll just come in here and say return render, and this will take in our request, and in here we shall have our template name being update.html, and then we shall have our context. So the context is going to be a dictionary. That's going to contain that specific form we want to render. Now we can choose to use the same form that the one we used to create, which is basically okay. So I'm going to first of all create our form, and that will be our task create form. So it's going to be our task create form, and in this task create form, since we are rendering on a get request, we shall just have the form having the instance of the task we want to update. So let's go ahead and get that task. So I'll say task, and this task is going to be task dot objects dot get, and in this case shall have our ID being our task ID. So once we've been able to do that, now this form, since it's going to update, needs to have data of that task we want to update. Now that's where the instance comes in. So we're going to say that our instance is going to be our task. So let's try to create this template. Now what I'm going to do is to come here in our templates folder. I'll create a file and call this update.html. So when you create this file and call it update.html, we're now going to go ahead and basically inherit our layout by saying extends and then base.html. Now whatever the template we have is going to be, the template actually we're going to have is going to be very similar to the one for adding. So I'm just going to come here and I'll copy whatever we have in here. I'll basically paste it here. So I'll say block, and this will be our block content, and then we shall have end block content. Then in our HTML in here we shall paste in what we have here. So I'm going to change this to from create to update. So I'll just come and say update, and then I'm going to go ahead and have everything like the way we have it here. So let us try to view this template. Now our context has to have our form, which I've actually forgotten to create. So I'll just say context, and this context is going to be a dictionary and contain our form, and our form is going to be our form object. So I'll say form is form. Now you may look at my code and say, why is it so disorganized? So I have black installed. Now I'm going to use black to format it. I'm going to highlight everything and then say format document. So this will basically organize the code so that it follows PEP 8. Got you. So let's go ahead and try to basically handle this and see how it's being rendered. So our server is running, but we need to provide links to updating each of our tasks. Now I'm going to do that in our detail page. So I'm going to come and basically come and say href, and our href here is going to be the one for updating the task. Now this is going to be the one similar to what we have for viewing the task. Now in here I'm going to copy this entire URL. What I have to modify is going to be the name. So I'm going to copy this and then go to the detail, paste in here, and then instead of saying view task, it's going to be for updating the task, but it's going to have the same argument of the task ID being the ID of that task we want to update. So here we shall just come and say update task. And then when we head over back to our detail page, we shall now see that we're having update task. Now to make this look more pleasing, I'm just going to add the line break so that when you refresh, we now see that this lies on a new line. Just creating a very simple app. So when you click on update task, we now see that it's actually leading us to the page where we update our task, which is wonderful. But when you try to submit this, we see that it's not doing anything and it's not redirecting anywhere. So now we have to write the logic to handle this post request, or the one for updating a task. Now, for us to do that, we're going to head over to our vis.py in here. And what we shall do is to come and say that if our request dot method is going to be equal to post. So in here, what we're going to do is to, first of all, get our form with the instance and the modifications that are being done to that instance. So the way we do that is by basically having the same form instance right here. But this form instance is actually going to have the data that comes from the post request. So I'm going to come here and say that our data is going to be equal to request.post. I'm going to come and say request.post. And after doing that, then we shall basically check if it's valid, and if it's valid, we shall save the data and then redirect to our home page. So I'll say if form.is valid, so this is actually going to be if form.is valid, then we shall basically go ahead and say form.save, where we're going to save our form, and then we shall have to redirect to our home page. So I'll say return redirect, and then in here we shall basically redirect to the reverse of our home page, or the URL of our home page. So once we've been able to do that, now let's go ahead and try to test our updating. So in this case, if we go right here and maybe go and study the word of, let's say, John, and we try to add that task, we now see that it's actually updating and taking us to go to church. So right now we see that our task has been updated to go study the word of John, which is now actually working. So let's also work on the delete view. So the delete view is quite straightforward. All we have to do is to go ahead and say first query for the task. So I'm just going to copy some of the code that we have here and then paste it here. And once we pasted it here, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and delete this task with task.delete, and we shall redirect. So we're going to say return redirect, sorry for this, so this will be redirect, and then we shall redirect to our home page. So just going to say reverse and then home page. All right, so the next thing is going to be for us to attach this to our URLs, or attach the URL to our detail page. So I'm going to go to our detail page right here, and all I have to do is to come and provide our delete URL. So I'm just going to come in here and say delete task. I'm going to save, and then I'll also update this from update to delete. So I'll just come and say delete task. So once we have this, if I go ahead and refresh, when you try to delete task, you shall see that that specific task has been deleted, which is amazing. So we have a full CRUD app here, which is basic. So now that we've been able to build this very simple CRUD app, let us look at how we can modify it so that we use class-based views. Now you may ask, what are class-based views? So class-based views allow us to model our views in terms of classes, and these classes can allow us to customize our views in ways that are very organized. If you look at our view code right here, what you have is a bunch of functions that basically take in requests and then return responses. But what if we modeled each of these functions as classes that would go ahead and customize in any of the ways we want? That will actually be better. So we're going to first of all look at the class-based views, and I'm going to talk about the generic class-based views in another video. So let's get started. So we're going to modify each of the view functions that we have here so that they can actually be class-based views. And we're going to look at how we can format or basically refactor this code to make it look better and to make it look more organized by using classes. So every class-based view basically comes from or inherits from the view class. So let's go ahead and first of all import our view class. So what I'm going to do is to say from Django dot views, we are going to import our view class. And once we've imported our view class, then the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and define a class, a view class. Now I'm going to come and say class. So this is going to be the one for our home page. So I'll just come and say home page. So it's going to be our home page view. So let me actually define it as our home page view. And this is going to inherit from our view class. So once we've been able to do that, then the beauty is we can define methods or HTTP methods, just like you see get, post, delete, for each of these specific view functions. Now that we know that this is going to be a get request where we're going to basically access the home page, we can just define the method by saying dev get, and then here we shall basically place in ourselves to refer to that view object, and then in here we shall just basically carry out all the logic that we need in here. But this is also going to work similar to what we have here because it needs to take in a request. So I'm going to come and modify this to provide our request object, and then after doing that, the next thing is going to be for us to get our tasks. So I'm just going to come here and say that our tasks are going to be actually what we have here is what we're going to basically have within our view method. So I'll basically copy what we have here and then paste it in here. So I'll fix the indentation to match what we have in our method. So I'm going to fix our tasks and then everything will be working. So what we have now is a basic class-based view, and this class-based view basically has the view function wrapped in a method. Now this is wonderful as you can get to know what happens when we call a specific HTTP method. If you're to notice, what we did was to specify get methods, those are the default, and then basically check if we have the post method by saying if request.method.post. But you're going to see how we can handle this later when we're looking at such a view that has both requests. Now let's go ahead and attach this to our URL or modify our URL patterns so that they can include this class-based view instead of our home page function-based view. So I'm going to save, and when I save, I'm going to go back to our URLs within our task app, and instead of add task, we are now going to have views.home page view. So for us to basically change this into a function-based view, we shall have to call a method called the dot as view method. So once we have this, then in here is where we can basically attach things like decorators and other attributes that this homepage view can have. So let's go ahead and try to go ahead and do the same thing for the other view functions. So I'm going to save, and when I save, hoping that our server is running, we have no problem. So if we go right here and try to refresh, we now see that we can successfully get to our home page. So the beauty is when you have a class, we have attributes, and then those attributes can be basically accessed from anywhere we want them. So I'll go ahead and get rid of our home page view because now we have a class-based view. Now let us try to handle the one for adding a task. So to modify this, we're going to begin by creating a class, and this class is going to be the one for adding our task. So what I'm going to do is to call this task create view. So this is going to be our task create view, and this is going to be inheriting from our view class. Now in here, we can basically do a lot of things. So one of the things we can do is to actually modify our classes so that we can have our template names being attributes to our views so that we can easily change them when we want. So I'm going to first of all modify this to template and then name, and this will be our index. So this will be our index.html. So once we've been able to do that, I'll do the same thing for our task create view by defining our template name. And this template name is going to be our, so what did we call this? We call it our add.html. So we need to come and say add.html. And then I'm also going to get the form class and then make it an attribute of the class. So I'll say that our form class, and this form class is going to be our form, which is actually going to be our task create form. So when you have that, then we can also set some initial values of that. So may come and say initial, and this is going to be equal to a dictionary. It's going to have a key and then mapped onto a value. So this will also be a string. So once I've been able to do that, now I'm going to define the methods that we shall need for this request. By default, what this view function does is to render our add.html. And when you have our method being post, then what you're going to do is to get the form data with the post request data, and then go ahead and save that specific form. Now let's go ahead and implement this using a class-based view. So for us to do that, I'm going to come and say def, and this will be our get request. So this will take in self, which is the object, and then it will take in the request object. Now let's go ahead and actually render our template. Now rendering our template is going to be as simple as saying return render, and then in here we shall render our request object and then the template name. So instead of hard coding the template name in here, all you have to do is to use self dot and then template name. So that's basically how we can access our template name. In case we want to modify it to another template, we'll just have and modify the add.html, just like you see right there. So now we shall also have our context. So our context is going to have our form, but you can provide it as a dictionary directly. So what I'm going to do in here is to basically provide our form, and our form is going to be our form object. So in here we can say self dot form class, because we already have our task create form being defined here. So we can say self dot form class, and in here we can define our initial values as self dot initial. So just like you can see here, object-oriented programming is being utilized to make our code look more organized, which is beautiful. So I'll have to basically go ahead and change this. So if I go ahead and save, I'm going to go where we have our URLs, and then I'll go where we are adding our tasks. We actually have this being views.home. I made a mistake here. The view function is being attached to the wrong URL. So I'm going to change what I have here. So this is the one for homepage. Our view for the homepage is actually supposed to be on our homepage. So I'll modify that. And then where we have the one for adding tasks, we're going to have views dot task create form. So in here we shall have our task create view. Sorry for this. So it's going to be our task create view. And then we shall call dot as view to make it a view function. So when you have this, then the next thing is going to be basically going ahead to modify this so that it actually creates our task. So when you go back to our views, all the logic that we have in here is what we're going to actually modify and adjust into a separate method. Now let me fix this so that it can appear more readable. So when you go to a new line, we are now going to come and say def, and then this will be post, and then self. So in here we shall have our request object, and then now if you're to picture what we have here, we have our form having our data, which is going to be the request data. But since we modify this so that we make our form class an attribute of basically the task create view, then you can basically modify this to be form is equal to, so this will be equal to self dot form class. So this will be self dot form class, and then in here we shall have our data being equal to request dot post. So this is actually saving us from writing this entire statement of if request.method is equal to post. Now the rest of the things are going to be the same. So we shall just have to copy what we have here and then paste it in here. So basically what is going to happen is we shall check if the form is valid, and if it is, we shall use it to save our data. So I'm just going to come in here, modify our indentation, everything is nice. And then in case this fails, what we need to do is to just render the template, or be able to render the template. So what I'll do is to just come here and then return our template with the form. So just like that, we've been able to handle our form. Now the reason as to why I'm trying to modify this, or the reason as to why I started with function views, is to just show you how easy it is for you to migrate from class-based views and from function-based views, and then be able to modify your views so that they can be your class-based views. Now the thing is, when you have this, instead of having if request.method is post, what you're having are different methods handling the different logic or the different lines of code for the different HTTP methods, which is amazing. Let me go ahead and reformat my code so that it looks a little bit organized. So I have black installed also, which you can also install with pip install black. It's just a code formatter. Now once I've been able to do this, then I'm going to go ahead and basically test our updating. So which is actually the one for adding, the one that we have here. So for us to be able to test this, I'm going to modify our URLs, hoping that our server is still running. We have homepage view, views.views.homepage view. So I made that mistake in our URL pattern. So I'm going to get rid of this, and then our server is going to restart. So in here, we are going to go ahead and test our task creation. So when I go and say learn Python, this is actually our detail page, but I'm going to go to create task. So I'm going to create a task called do the, or let's say learn Java, and then here I'll say learn, it's actually going to be learn programming with Java. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. So right now we see that it has been added, which is now working fine. So we've been able to successfully modify that and make it a class-based view. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the remaining ones. So I'm going to begin with the one for, I'll actually first remove the add task view function, since we have already created a task create view right here. Now when you go to view task, now this is actually going to be easy as creating the class. So we're going to begin by creating our class right here. So our class is going to be class, and then we shall call this our task detail. So this is going to be our task detail view. And then in here, we are going to have this inheriting from our view class. Now, since this is for us to be able to view a task, then it's going to be a get method. So I'm just going to come and say get. This will take in self, and then it will also take in the request object. So once we have this, then the next thing is going to be for us to render our template, and then basically render the task that we want to render. So we shall have to define our template name as an attribute. So I'll just come and say template name, and our template name in this case is going to be our detail. Actually, that's what we called it. So it's going to be detail.html, just like you see right here. So I'm just going to come and say detail.html, and we shall have to render this. So I'll say return render, and this will be request, and then we shall access our template name. So we shall say self.template name. Excuse me. So once we've been able to do this, then we shall now have our context. So in here, we'll just come and say task and our task is the one that we're going to actually get from our database. So we shall have a task variable. But since this is not defined, then we shall have to define it now. To save time, I'm just going to copy the task that we have here and then paste it right here. Virtually cut it. So the task ID is not defined, but it should be got from our method right here. So we need to provide a task ID. So this will be our task ID. So what will happen is on our get method, we shall have our task being rendered and then returned in the template. Now let's modify our URL. So I'll go to urls.py and then instead of view task, we shall have views.task detail view. And then to make this a view function, we shall have to say dot as view. So once I've been able to do that, let's go ahead and test this up. So if we go to our browser and then we go back to our home page, we shall now basically go to our detail view and it will be working just fine. So now that we've been able to do that, let's go ahead and try to modify our update view and our delete view. So I'm going to go to views.py within our, so I have to first get rid of what we have here for our function based view, and then we're going to work on the one for deleting, or actually let's first work on the one for updating. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing by saying class, and then this will be task update view. And then here we are going to inherit from our view class. So once we have this, then since we have first of all rendering the template, we shall have to first use a get request. So I'm going to first define the method. So we shall have get, this will take in self and the request as well as our, so this will be our task ID, same as we have down here. So this will be our task ID. Now pass this for now, and then we are going to have our post method, which is being the one for basically posting or sending the data back to our server. So in here we're going to be saying self, and then this will be request, and then we shall have our task ID. So I'll come here and say pass. And once we have that, then let's go ahead and define some of the variables that we may need to be attributes to this class. So the first one is going to be our template name. So we're going to have our template name. And our template name in this case is going to be equal to update. So let's see what we used here. So this is going to be update.html. So shall just come and provide it there. And then we shall also have our form class, which we call our task create form. So shall have our form class. And then this is going to be equal to our task create form. So once we've been able to do this, then we shall also need to have some initial data. I don't think we need it that much since we are going to have our instance, or basically the object that we want to query for. So let's go ahead and try to handle this. So the first thing we shall have to do is to get our task. So I'm just going to save time by basically copying what we have in here. And then once we have that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically define our form, but it's going to have the instance of that task that we want to update. So in here, we're going to say that our form is going to be equal to, so we shall say self.form class, and in here we shall basically say that our data, actually our instance, since this is a get request, we shall not be having request.post. So in here is going to be our instance, which is going to be the task we want to update. So we shall have to render our template. So it's going to be return render, and in here shall first provide our request object and then the template. So shall say self.template name and then the context, which is going to have our form. So shall have form, and then that will be our form. So when you try to modify our URL, so in here we're going to come for the one for updating. So instead of having update task, we shall have task update view, and then this is going to be .as view, and the name will be update task. So once we've been able to do this, then the next thing is going to be for us to handle the post request. So one thing I wanted to do is to first of all test our update. So if we go back here and we try to update our task, we now see that our get request is working successfully. So let's try to handle the post request. Now we have some logic here that's basically for getting the form, creating our form instance by providing our instance or the task we want to update, as well as the data that comes from our post request. So for us to be able to do that, since we have our form class being an attribute of this view, then we'll have to just say form, and that will be equal to ourself dot form class, and then in here we're going to have our instance, which is our task, and then we shall also have our data. So the data is going to be the one to update that task we want to update. So that data is going to be equal to request dot post, and when you have this, then we are now going to go ahead and check if it's valid. So our task is actually going to be first of all queried. So I'm just going to come and copy our query right here and then paste it in here. So once you've been able to do that, then we check if the form is valid. So shall say if form dot is valid. So this is basically going to go ahead and save the form. So shall say form dot save, and then we shall basically go ahead and redirect to our home page. Now just basically also copy that to save time. So return redirect, reverse, and then home page. So just like that, we'll be able to redirect to our home page. And in case we failed to produce the form valid, then we shall need to basically redirect and return the template. So now that we have this, let's actually test our updating. So I'm just going to go, since we've already modified our URL right here, we are now going to head over to our template and we click update. So it's going to just basically redirect us to the home page. But if we go ahead and update this, so let's say we're going to update it to learn Python programming and try to add our task, we shall see that it has been updated successfully, which is working right now. So now let's go ahead and refactor the one for deleting our task. So I'm going to come right here and get rid of the view function, replace it with our new updated view function, view class, or views of class-based view, just like we have here. So you guys will forgive me because I'm recording this at night. So what I'm going to do is to basically format the document so that we have more organized code, just like the one we have here. So let's go ahead and modify this. So this is basically going to be a get request, but in this get request we shall delete our task object. So to do this, I'll define our task delete view. So this is going to be task delete view, and in this task delete view we shall inherit from our view class. So in here we can actually basically modify this and make it our view method. So we shall have, instead of having delete task, we can just basically go ahead and just change this to be our get method. So I'll just come and say get, and then this will take in the request as well as the ID of that request we want to, that task we want to delete. So I'll save. When I save, then the next thing is going to be for us to modify our URL. So instead of having our view function here, we shall modify this so that we have our class-based view. So we shall call that .asView method, and now we shall be done. So let's go ahead and check this out. So when I go back to our tasks here, refresh, go back here, can be able to delete it. So now we see that task delete view got multiple values for the task ID. So let's see what this is going to be So when you have our request, oh, we did not provide self, so I think that's the reason. So we shall have to say self and then the request, since this is a method to this class, sorry for that. Then we shall be able to basically go ahead and delete our task. So let me go back. So when you try to delete our task, we shall see that our task has been deleted successfully. Now you may ask me, what is the point of making this long video? So I was just trying to show you how you can basically go ahead and modify your code from view functions and turn them to class-based views. Class-based views make your code more organized, and they allow you to basically be able to customize your views in a very simple way. They can also save you from writing multiple if statements. When you know the correct methods or the correct HTTP statuses that you want, the correct HTTP methods that you want to use for your views, then using class-based views will save you, because you'll have to define those views as methods to an entire view, just like you see right here. You can also notice that when you write your code using class-based views, you actually save time. Now these are the raw class-based views, and I'll create a video where I'll be talking about the generic generic class-based views that Django provides. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Or if you've also liked my haircut, just like you see, I lost all the hair that I had. Also leave a like and leave a comment about maybe my haircut. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.